Most of us know what 1492 means, 1776 means, 1860 means, 1812, 1945. There are different dates that in our history in America that stand out for us, that are significant and important, because it tells the history of our people and of our land. It's the same thing in Orthodoxy in America, that there are certain dates that are very significant for us. 1741 is very important. It's the first time in the Western Hemisphere, the whole Western Hemisphere, that an Orthodox liturgy was celebrated. This was in the Bering Sea on the feast of St. Elias the Prophet in the year 1741 on the Russian ship, naval ship, named after St. Peter. This week, Tuesday, September 24th, is a very significant day in Orthodoxy in America. On that day, 225 years ago, in the year 1794, after a journey of 293 days, of 7,237 miles, the longest missionary journey in history, 8 monks came from the Lamo Monastery near St. Petersburg, Russia, and they landed at Kodiak, Alaska. These 8 monks began the missionary work in the Western Hemisphere of bringing the Orthodox faith. These 8 monks, they came to Alaska. They were asked to come to help the Russian settlers there, their tradesmen, the fur merchants. And they came, but not to care so much for the Russian settlers, but to bring the gospel to the natives. In Alaska, there's at least 4 different native tribes, different languages, different cultures. They all have their own traditions and ways. And so these monks came, and they labored there. We know some of them. We know all of them by name. St. Juvenali, the first martyr in Alaska, martyred on the shores of Lake Iliamna. St. Herman, the last of the monastic group who reposed in the year 1837, the great wonder worker of all America, as we claim him to be. The one who performed miracles in his life, who was a simple monk, who was the most godly of people, the spiritual patron of the Orthodox Church in America. And so they came to preach the gospel, and they learned the languages of the people. Later, St. Innocent, the great hierarch, the Metropolitan of Moscow, the great apostle to Alaska and Siberia, he came. He translated things into the language of the natives there, and not only in America and Alaska, but also in Siberia. When he was stationed there, again, local tribes, learning the language, preaching the gospel, not making them Russian Orthodox, but making them Orthodox and allowing their native culture to be expressed in Orthodoxy. It's a hallmark of Russian Orthodox missions to preach the gospel and not to make people religious colonists. They had no intent to expand the Russian Empire. They were Russian citizens, yes, but that wasn't their intent. Their intent was to bring the gospel. This was the criteria of the mission work in Alaska. This is how Orthodoxy came to the New World. It didn't come with immigrants coming, bringing their faith. No, it came with missionaries coming to evangelize people that were pagans who did not know Christianity. And they labored there. They labored there in Alaska. They labored there until Alaska was sold, and then already it was well established, the Orthodox faith there. And it was sufficient enough, the church there, that the Russian church allowed a diocese to be formed here in America to care not only for the natives in Alaska, but to expand the mission. And so the church went from Alaska, it went to San Francisco. And then the archbishop was there, and then later it went to New York, and that was the time of the great immigrations in the 1890s, the 1900s, when slews of people came from different countries, and they brought their Orthodox faith here, and they brought their priests here, and eventually they brought their bishops here, and they were provided for here in America. It's important to realize that Orthodoxy came to preach the gospel in the Western Hemisphere. that it didn't come to bring a certain culture, a certain language, a certain empire, that it was to preach the purity of the gospel. This is what is mandated by our Lord himself. We just heard that in the gospel last night, according to Mark. Go forth into all the nations and baptize. Preach the gospel to every creature. And this is the work of the church. It's the ministry of the church mission. It was natural for the church to send missionaries to people who did not know the faith, who were excluded from the Holy Orthodoxy. Of course, that work still continues. But the Orthodox in America were less than 1% of the total population. America is mission territory. People do not know the Orthodox Church. And if they do know something about Orthodoxy, oftentimes it's foods, or it's festivals, or it's dancing. It's those kind of things. And so they know us not as promoters of the gospel of Christ, but they know us as people that have certain foods and traditions and costumes and dancing and this and that. And they like that. And they attend our festivals and things. And we present ourselves as ethnic Orthodox. It was natural for the immigrants to come. When they came from the countries, they were here in America, there was no priest. Natural for them to come and have their priest to give them solace and comfort, consolation, and to strengthen them here in their communities. In the steel mills of western Pennsylvania, in the farmlands of the Midwest, and the cities of the West, and all that was natural. But what happened, what people don't realize, is that when Orthodoxy came to America, for the first 125 years or so, there was one church in America. There was one bishop. It was the Russian bishop. Metropolitan Platon, Saint Patriarch Tikhon, Archbishop Benjamin, the different bishops that served here, Saint Raphael, the Arab bishop that was part of the Russian church here in America. And for 125 years, all the parishes across the United States were served by one bishop, and that was the bishop of the Russian church, of the diocese that was established originally in Alaska and came to the lower 48. There weren't different multiple jurisdictions as we have today. Those jurisdictions only happened later, when through the tragedy of the Russian Revolution, communication was broke with Russia, and people established their own churches. So the Greek Archdiocese was established in 1921, and the Antiochian Church in 1925, and then the Serbs and everybody else, they started their own jurisdictions here in America. And those jurisdictions still stay here in America. And those jurisdictions are part yet of the mother churches in Antioch, and in Romania, and in Serbia, and in Bulgaria, and in Constantinople. But there was one church that remained purely, if you want, American. And that was the original Russian mission church. That it understood that it was the local church in America. And so when those tragedies came, that church remained faithful to the vision and the understanding that the monks brought to Alaska in 1794. That America is mission territory. That there needs to be a local church in America. Not only to care for the people that immigrate from the old countries and to care for their spiritual needs. That's only part of the picture. Just like the monks in Alaska, they took care of the Russian traders and fishermen there. But their main thrust was the conversion of people who did not know Christ. And the main thrust of the church should be, a local church should be, to bring Orthodox Christianity to people who do not know the fullness of Christian faith. This is the missionary imperative that we have. It's not just to take care of ourselves and those that are in-house. We just don't provide for our own, nash ludi, our people. If we do, as Father Schmemann says, this is spiritual decadence and it is death. If the community, the local church, the parish church, if it's only built upon caring for ourselves and it's enclosed, and it doesn't have outreach to others, if it doesn't understand its mission imperative, and it's weighed down by ethnicity and nationalism and culture and language that doesn't speak to America, then we are defeating the purpose of what the gospel is. The church is not to perpetuate certain languages, cultures, ethnicities, or nations. We're not even here to establish an American church. We're only here to establish the Orthodox Church in America, for America. And is that necessary? Well, of course it is. You read, you understand, you see what's going on in our country, in our society. You see where the Western churches no longer have any spiritual authority. We see that they're decadent already, that they're split in their doctrinal understandings, that they've given themselves over to modernism and secularism. And that's why their churches are empty. No one goes to the churches anymore. No one believes in the church because the churches haven't produced what they ought to do. This is understandable in one sense because they're heterodox and they could never give the fullness of the gospel. But the Orthodox Church can and must give the fullness of the gospel. This is our vocation. This is our ministry. Sometimes people think that mission work is a task of the church. Whether we do it because we love God, or we do it because we're obedient to the command, go forth and teach all nations and baptize them. And all that is true. We should be obedient to the command, and we should do it for the love of God. But it's even deeper than that. The great missionary who spent so many years in Africa and re-established the Albanian church after the fall of communism there, Archbishop Athanasius. But he says that there's a spiritual DNA in the Orthodox Christian by virtue of baptism. By virtue of baptism, the Orthodox Christian needs and wants and desires to know God. And not only to know God, but to share God with others. It's part of who we are. It's built into us. In other words, there's a missionary spirit within us. And that missionary spirit isn't to preach or teach, perhaps. That's for some, yes, but not for everybody. But it's to witness to our faith. It's to bring the content of our faith and the strength of our faith to others so that they see us. As the Lord says, let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in the heavens. And he says, you are the salt of the earth. You are the light that's put on the stand, not under the bushel, but it's put on the stand so people could see it, the light. And so we're called to be missionaries, witnesses to our faith. All too often we just think we're self-enclosed, that we care for ourselves and our community. And this is important, yes, it's very important, because there's an internal mission of the church. And the internal mission of the church is for each one of us. If you remember, Archbishop Michael said that very eloquently on our anniversary. He said it requires each one of us to be full members of the church so that they could see Christ in us when we gather. That Christ could be in our midst, and Christ be in our midst, we bring Christ to others. That we have to understand that this is our activity. This is who we are. And this is why we do it, because of who we are. We're bearers of Christ. We have to bear Christ out to the school and to the activities that we engage in our daily life. We can't keep Christ hidden. People say, oh, I didn't even know you're an Orthodox Christian. Well, they should have known we're an Orthodox Christian. Well, I've known you for 20 years. I didn't know you were a Christian. Why? We need to bring our faith to others. The internal mission of the church needs to be strengthened. We ourselves in our parish community have to go deeper into the meaning of our faith, the understanding of our faith, the catechisms of our faith, the learning of our faith. More church services, more spiritual reading, more prayer, more fasting, more discerning the will of the Lord. And the internal mission of the church is to have the synthesis in the parish. that our parish is very blessed. When it was founded here 100 years ago, the people had to struggle to establish this parish. They all came from one part of Eastern Europe. They came and they settled and they worked. And they built the parish. They sacrificed. They didn't have a lot. They were people that were just coming off the boat, as it says. And yet they knew the importance of having the faith in the church, and they worked hard. They worked hard in their daily life. And they established a home, and they took mortgages, and they worked hard, and they built a little church, and that church grew. And over the time, a synthesis took place. It was no longer a Russian church, or Carpathian Russian church, that it became the church for all kinds of people. Georgians, Romanians, Greeks, Americans, Italians, everybody finds a place. That there's no dominant culture, no dominant traditions that kind of prevail. That there's a living synthesis here. And this is what a local church should be. It should be all the people gathered together. It doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, young or old. It doesn't matter what your nationality is. It doesn't matter what your background is. None of those things matter. As Paul says, there's neither Greek nor Jew nor slave nor free man, but everyone is one in Christ. Everyone is welcome. There is no exclusion. Everyone that comes through the doors that is not Orthodox is invited to be Orthodox, and we should have the intent to help them, to bring them into the Holy Orthodox Church. In other words, this parish church isn't just for ourselves. That it's here as a lighthouse for others that are in the troubled waters of life. That we have to discover ways to make sure that we are doing the external mission of the church, to bring our faith out to others, and to encourage others to come into our church. We read those things in the bulletin all the time. That when people come to the church and they do surveys on this, how did people find the church? And it said 86% of those that came to the church, that they came because they were invited by a friend, not by the priest, and not by publicity. They saw something on the website. No, but somebody said, hey, I'm going to my church. Maybe you'd like to come and see what it's all about. And they took the initiative, and they brought them. But we bring them to pierogi dinners, but we don't bring them to the church. The anniversary this week of September 24th, 1794, is not just a historical footnote of the life of Orthodoxy in America, but it reminds us of our calling, which is to be mission. It reminds us of the local church. That the local church is there for the people. The local church, the parish church, isn't just for the members of this community, but it's for all those that are in the immediate geographic territory. Our responsibility is for those that are unchurched, that are outside. Those that are unchurched that no longer go to their Protestant Catholic churches because they don't find meaning and substance, and they're disappointed in that faith. Those who have no church, those who have no spiritual home, those who don't even know who Jesus Christ is. And our task is to bring Jesus Christ to everyone. And we do that by witnessing to our faith, by living the content of our faith strongly, so that people could see that there's something in us that magnetizes them to come with us to the church. We can't live as people that are just satisfied with who we are. This anniversary celebration, it's important because it brings us again to the criteria of our faith. And the criteria of our faith is always the good news, the gospel of Jesus Christ. We can't water it down. We can't make it suitable for people that want something less. That the fullness of the gospel, Christ crucified, risen from the dead, ascended into heaven, and coming again in glory, that this is what we preach and teach. This is what we believe in. This is what we live in. And this is what we have to offer, what people really need. And so as we have that celebration, think of that date, 1794. It's significant for us. It's not just a historical date, but it reminds us of who we are and what our vocation is. Finally, in Orthodoxy in America, We don't have what we find in other Orthodox countries. If you go to Georgia, Romania, Serbia, Greece, it's homogenous. Everybody has the same faith. They have the same language, the same culture. In America, it's a melting pot. It's not the same. There's different traditions. There's different customs. There's different kind of vestments. There's all kinds of things that are different. And in America, when people come together in the melting pot, they share things. And the glory of America is this, is that people that were in their own countries, Orthodox countries, Orthodox lands, and they had their culture, their tradition, their ways, which are wonderful and to be treasured. But they're not to be made idols. They can't be stumbling blocks when people come into the church. There was a woman once who converted to Orthodoxy. She was an Episcopalian. And some lady said, we're going to make pierogies. Do you want to come and make pierogies? She says, no, I don't make pierogies. I don't like pierogies. He said, well, why not? Don't you remember that? I said, I didn't become Orthodox to eat pierogies. I became Orthodox because I discovered the truth. And if I like pierogies or don't like pierogies, that's beside the point. We can't bring people to the church on other things, on festivals and cultural things. And the glory of America, again, is this, is when people come from these different countries and they bring their traditions and their customs and their culture, that it's no longer in isolation. That now people in a given parish could share those things. And those things could be treasured and those things could be shared and synthesized so that there's harmony and there's beauty. In our parish, you probably don't pay attention to this too much. But you know, every time there's a feast day of another church, we celebrate that here. Even if you don't come, we still celebrate. We don't let St. Nicholas of Japan, the great missionary to Japan, we don't let his feast day go by. Because we honor and understand his missionary work in Japan. We don't let the Feast of the Martyrs of China go by, because we understand the importance of the missionary work in China, the martyrs that took place there, and St. John Maximovich as bishop in Shanghai, China. We don't let the Feast of St. Boris of Bulgaria go by without celebrating. We don't let the Feast of St. Nicholas, Raphael, and Irene go by without celebrating. We don't let the Feast of St. Anthemus of Wallachia, who was a great Georgian, who spent his time in Moldavia and was martyred, whose feast is this week, by the way, we don't let that go by, that we celebrate. And so we're not a Russian church. We're a church that celebrates all the saints. We're a church that incorporates all the traditions. We're a church, a community that believes that there's a great synthesis of Orthodoxy here in this local community. But it's still not enough. That our faith must go beyond the church doors. It must go out. The jurisdictions in America are still here. They'll be here for who knows how long. And they'll be subject to the mother churches. But 50 years ago, and the celebration will be next year, the Russian Mission Church in America became the autocephalous Orthodox Church in America. And what that meant is that this church now is not subject to the mother churches across the ocean. That this church is self-governing. That its vocation, its vision, its desire is to missionize America. Not only to care for those that are the different multiple ethnicities in America, and the Orthodox Church in America does that, by the way. The Orthodox Church in America, you have multitudes of natives from Alaska. You have Albanians, you have Romanians, you have Bulgarians, you have Mexicans, you have all kinds of people that are united. But the vision is not ethnicity, it's not national. It's spiritual. It's on the gospel. And we, as our parish, as a parish of the Orthodox Church in America, we should rejoice in that. We should understand what our vision is. Our vision is the vision of the Orthodox Church in America. Our responsibility is the responsibility of the gospel, to preach Jesus Christ. So this little anniversary, the 225th anniversary, we'll have a little service tomorrow. We'll honor St. Herman, anoint with oil from his grave. We'll St. Herman to intercede for us as the great patron missionary of America. But let us resolve not only to have that date, 1794, etched in our minds, but even more so to have that vision, the vision of evangelizing and bringing the gospel to this country, which is spiritually poor. This continent that doesn't know Jesus Christ. This is our sacred task. Internal mission, yes, and the external mission. Glory to Jesus Christ. Amen.